You know, I sit here, or I'm standing here, feeling that I'm really honored to be before you guys. Michael Oyer, Effie Hunja, John C.B. Okumu, and Sheila Mwanyiga. You've been my colleague. And yes, these stories of corruption, are they new to you? Michael, you've been a news anchor before, and you've read stories about corruption. So from the time that actually you were anchoring and delivering this news, do you think there has been any change, or graft has really delved deeper? And so right now it's really kicked, you know, in the cake, is really back in the cake, I should say.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
And my apologies for coming in late. Corruption is a story that we covered often, even when I was involved in media then. I'd like to borrow from a late mentor of mine, now that we're talking about mentorship. And when I asked him, I think it was earlier this year or last year, you know, has corruption become worse, or what is going on? His reasoning was, no, it's not worse. It's just that we require more for the activities that we would be corrupt for. Case being, 1 acre of land in the 70s was probably, I don't know, 50,000 shillings. Now, the same acre of land might be 50 million shillings. So the corruption has just only increased in terms of how the economy has grown. That's one way of thinking of it. But I have to admit that the figures that we hear about and talk about are astounding. In fact, I think billion has become common. We're now waiting for the trillion mark so that we can get shocked, because you know, you have 5 billion, 1 billion. I mean, is that a big one? 200 billion sounds like now the next. Maybe that's big enough,
right.
Unfortunately.
From the list of your docket, maybe while you're reading news, because right now we can have even 5 stories, you know, top stories being corruption stories, compared to that particular time when you are actually delivering news. And now, do you see there's quite a move? You know, the needle has moved quite exponentially in terms of corruption also in the country. We can have 5 stories all on corruption.
I mean, that's what I mean. It is a little overwhelming with just the degree of it. But I wonder whether it's a case of the investigative journalism, or the ability to prod and search and look into has increased, or there are more bodies that are pursuing and giving this information, or people are making this information more available. Because if I'll stand corrected, but the time we were reading news, the Moi regime and early Kibaki, there was still a lot of control. So you might get information, but it's more likely that you might not get too much of the sort of information that I think we can now boldly come and talk about on air. And then the information is finding its way in various different media. You don't only have 1 or 2 television channels, just a few radio stations, and the newspapers. I mean, you have everyone on their Twitter page or as social media websites and the like. So I think that allows for more information to get out, and therefore I think on journalists there's a greater demand and requirement that you be able to, on behalf of the public, sift and make sure that that which we now read or see from places such as this are credible, verified information, and not just continuing with the usual, you know, rumor mill. You know what I heard? No, we don't want what you heard. Do you have some evidence to it? Yeah.
Right, Effie Hunja.
Well, I concur with Michael, but in addition to that, I'm thinking about where was the turning point of information overflow. And something happened right about 2007, after that election. It was a botched election, and there was a need for there to be a coalition government. And so different parties had different allegiances. And the spiral of that is that over time, if you wanted to fix this opponent of yours, then you would lick a dossier with all the wrongs that they were doing, and they did the same. And this played out very well when we had the president and the deputy come together and were at the ICC, and all these confessions began to come out. Yes, I was the one who fixed so and so, and I was the one, and you know, I want you to forgive me. You know, we are all together. And so I think that was also a turning point. So information that was not intended for you and I came to the public light. The other thing, just to reinforce what Michael was saying, is that when President Moi was leaving in 2002, our revenue would collect about 300 or something billion.
Yes.
So even if that was being pilfered, there was once they said, Joseph Kenywa said that about 30% of our total collection goes into individuals' pockets. So we are now at 2 trillion, so you can imagine the magnitude of that. And of course, the outlets for that information have become more and more. You know, we never used to read the news with our phones on. You know, that was criminal.
Yes.
But now you wouldn't read the news without your phone on, because you could get a tweet. You could, you know, you're interacting with your viewers. So I guess those factors have conspired for us to have all these stories about corruption come to the fore.
Right. John Sibiu Okumu, good morning.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I take some exception to this description that we're all sort of deadwood and we're talking in the past. I think a journalist doesn't die simply by virtue of age. I think we have chosen a culture where perhaps people want to see very young people on the screen, but if you watch American television throughout the elections, for example, Wolf, French television, some of these guys are in their 70s and still on screen. So maybe that's something for us to discuss later in the program. As for the whole notion of corruption, I would say that it's been said before, so I'll just reinforce it. It's becoming harder by the day. The stories are staying on the front page longer. In the bad old days, so to speak, a story would be stifled. Figures won't be named, names wouldn't be named. So I think in general, as a society, it's very easy to be very despondent and depressed about the country. I think Kenya as a country is moving forward, because I think that the simple truth that the more information you have, the more you as a citizen have the responsibility to respond to it. So I think, yes, there's lots of corruption, but it's good that we know about it.
All right, Sheila.
Good morning, Debal.
Morning
Thank
to
you
you.
very much for the invitation. It's great to be here with a fantastic panel. The pressure is intense, but on this issue of corruption, the very first time I heard the word corruption, I was a little girl, and my father explained it to me because I asked him, Dad, what does this thing mean? And he said, imagine you have 10 cows, and these 10 cows are supposed to feed everybody in the compound. And then one person takes one cow and makes it their own cow. So you've got 9 cows left to take care of everybody. Now, the person who's taken that one cow didn't ask everybody else about whether it would be fine to take the cow, didn't tell everybody else that there's only 9 cows working for us, but they saw it fit because of the position that they were in to take that cow. And the rest of the community couldn't do anything to stop that cow going. And we all sit in that community and know that this is really our cow, but we don't benefit from this cow. Now, he said, corruption is not just an African phenomenon. It is a global phenomenon. People are stealing cows left, right, and center. The magnitude of how they're being stolen is what's different. You've got a system where one person will steal a cow and the rest of the 9 will continue working. And it seems sometimes when we read the stories in the papers, yes, that we're not just stealing one cow, we're stealing 9 cows and leaving one to feed the whole entire country. But in understanding what corruption is and how it affects all of us, I have to make mention of the fact that with the explosion of media, with stories being uploaded, being published on a daily, on a minute basis, really, the onus for us as a public is, yes, we see these stories, Debal, one after the other, but the question becomes, then what? Nothing ever stays or appears reconciled. It becomes, because this one stole 5, then let's see who steals 7, and who's going to steal 10. And then it's 15, and then we don't have any cows, And we as a society are thinking, okay, we'll move away from eating cows, we'll just start eating grass then. Until somebody goes there and then we cover those stories. Then what? How do we reconcile? And that, I think, for me, becomes the biggest driver of this conversation. It is here, it is present. What do we do? Not just as leaders, but as ordinary Kenyans. What do we do?
Right. So how do we set the tone, of course, when it comes to staunching this flow of corruption in the country, right? And we're talking about mentorship today, and people eagerly looking out for, model figures, right? People that they want to be their role model. And each of you here, I know in one way or the other, you've actually played that active role of people looking up to you as role models in the society. And they wondered, where is John, where is Effie, where is Michael Uyer? And I know you ventured into different fields, and of course, largely also still in media. We would love to know from you, looking from where we are, the growth of media right now, the digital disruption that we have, that everyone is grappling with right now. They don't understand. The traditional media is bleeding in terms of revenue from the advertising. So the space has become so wide. From your own estimation, where do you think the future of media is, Michael?
Crystal ball.
Looking at it.
Well, obviously, when we saw the debacle that took place with the shift to digital media,
yes,
the signs were there a long time ago. I recall even being involved in the late 90s in discussions that were aimed towards preparing for the inevitable. On one hand, I look at the consumers of the different media, and I think there's a greater onus upon them to now do what journalists do on their behalf when you use, mass media, in terms of going beyond just what you read or what you watch or what you see. How true is this? And I don't know that it's easy to actually verify for yourself, something off the internet. But I find that you cannot believe everything you read, write, or hear. That would be risky with regard to the audience. When I look at digital media as an enterprise, whether it's an individual or a larger organization, I would say that the future and the difference lies in the ability to actually pass that test of credibility of your information, so that you become a trusted source as that individual or that entity. Stations such as yours have a history and reputation, so I'd ride on that, but you cannot avoid going into that, the broader digital space. And I think that if we look at how, the Facebooks of this world have grown, it requires some nimbleness. And I think that's the struggle right now for traditional media, to quickly get nimble. But the indications are there now. The movements have started, and it's actually, I think it's a survival race right now. As you say, bleeding. So it's a survival race right now. But the future, I think, is bright for the consumer, if the consumer remains savvy in distinguishing what is true and what isn't. You saw in the US, there was the whole thing about the elections and fake news being put up, and people believed and made decisions based on that. So how do I know that this is fake and this is real, so that when I go making my life decisions, I know I'm basing it on solid information? Yeah.
So why do you think also the role of models really matter in media? Many people, as I said, look up to the media, and picking up one or two guys from media as the personalities they want to follow. They want to really see how they model themselves in terms of just living about their lives, making out a living as well. Effie.
Well, John here alluded to something that's a pattern in our country, or maybe let's say in Africa, where you have where you have older folk being phased out of the screen for whatever reason, and people want to see young, new, fresh faces.
More experienced folk.
More experienced. I stand corrected. But when you think about the emergence of new media, you realize that the people who are winning are the people who are fast off the blocks. So if something happens, if there's a grand announcement from State House this morning, there is a likelihood that those of us seated here will most likely see it from one of our social media groups, or Twitter, or Facebook, and what have you. And so, fast off the blocks. But the challenge of fast off the blocks is also credibility.
Yes.
And how many times do you then retweet or forward something that you saw that it sort of made you tingle a bit, and you pass it on without a thought that is this real? Is this real, or is it just hype? And so there's a real danger with that.
Yes.
Traditional media is under threat as we know it, for the simple reason that the world has made great strides in terms of innovation and thought process towards the technical bit of expertise in a particular industry. So we have the Ubers, the Airbnbs, and all those, and there's a big upset globally. So it's not unique to media. I think what media needs to ask themselves is how do we then position ourselves? Number one, to remain credible. Number two, to be a tool that enhances quality of life, as opposed to just running for shareholder value.
Yes.
And shareholder value many times will interfere with truth or with fact because of bottom line. And so there's quite a couple of factors to consider if you're going to stay afloat. Yeah.
All right, the institutional memory, because you say, of course, you've mentioned Wolf and a couple of other guys that we know. They're people who have been on the screen, maybe from the western part of the world for quite a long time. And there is that outfacing that we see, maybe in the Kenyan media as well, of institutional memory. People who can actually, join the dots to a particular story. They can relate. This happened in this particular time, and this was the effect of that particular. How has it grown from them? Are we losing in terms of also the institutional memory? That yes, we want younger faces on our screen, despite the fact that maybe they cannot really join the dots, and they don't have, the benefits of a rich repository and knowledge of history that maybe the older folks really do have.
Well, Deval, I think the key word is research.
Research.
I don't think that you need to access information simply by virtue of age. I could go back now and look at the history of World War II. Even I wasn't born then. It's a great mystery, but I wasn't. But I could go back and find out who did what to whom. I think what people, you're drawing back on this idea that the presenter is some kind of role model and people should look up to us. I would say no. And it's a conversation that I've had with friends. When all of us here are employed by a station, we respond first and foremost to our employer. And any presenter has to sit down with the boss, however you define that word, and respond to a set of production values. So, for example, there's been a great media hullabaloo about how my friend and colleague Jeff Koinange conducted himself on screen and how despicable. I would go in his defense because you want viewers, you say, come up to the set, have a fire hose, have an extinguisher, and get people who by rights are going to argue. And so if I'm following that production brief from my boss, I'm going to get the two people who are most likely to be at loggerheads once they get onto the screen. And I might come onto the set not knowing that my arch enemy, Sheila, this is an example, you're not my arch enemy,
No, you're not.
you're my beloved,
I'm not.
is going to be there. So you have all this sort of dramatic thing. I saw Effie Hunja right next to me and I walked out, and people discussed that for ages on end. What we're talking about is a a greater maturity with regard to production values. And that maturity has to do with the branding of a station like Nation TV. You may not be the best, but your color schemes, your logos, all these things lead us to you saying, it's a bit like, you know, a rich guy living in a big house with a Mercedes. You feel inclined to think that possibly in there there's better food and you'd better go there than go and into an informal settlement to have, you know, chapati mayai. So, just that. And the other point that I'd like to make is that, good people, traditional media is not dead for the great surface area of the Kenyan country.
Yes.
If I speak for my own particular neck of the country, I don't walk into every home and find a TV set. The #1 purveyor of information remains perhaps radio. And then television is a sign of social mobility. So we normally look to the West and say it's digitized and people have got Samsung this and iPod that. And the Kenyan tendency is to say we're at the same level of development. The truth is we're not. So I think we still have a major role to play. We should take ourselves very seriously, and we hope that our bosses encourage to follow the story with a great deal of zeal and honesty, but not the individual. People shouldn't respond to the news because Sheila Mwanyiga is reading it or John Sibi Okumu. I think not.
So,
the news.
Right.
Just picking up on what he said, Debal, forgive me.
Sure.
The news is the news. The push should be, he's mentioned the editorial policy, and every media house is governed by its own media editorial policy. But what is, when truth comes in and it bends because of an editorial policy which is affected and directed and influenced by the bottom line, then what happens to the truth? Whatever is going to be filtered out on traditional platforms, yes, from conventional and traditional media, we can't affect this bottom line, but you can tell a little bit of this story, but you can't go for the depth of the story. Yes. I'm also thinking we've moved away from cash is king to content is king, which ties into something that Michael had mentioned when he started speaking, and he said, this thing called digital media, verification, because the story explodes and we tweet and retweet and add our comments, and by the end of the day you find out that everything we have been talking about is a lie. Who did you verify with? Where do you seek verification? So for everyone in the paper today, there are people, the young Kenyans, I saw this story, I was just flicking through the paper. If you pick up your paper today, there's an article about young Kenyans who are making money on social media. So you get a little bit of money to endorse a product, it goes and it affects me. For instance, I go and buy it based on what you have endorsed on your page. Yes. How do I get, where do I seek help when things go wrong with the product that has been endorsed? Who verified what I read? Someone has been given money for this story and it has exploded, but I'm left holding the bad stuff. Where do I go for help from here? So I'm just thinking, with the explosion of digital media, we have got to really push on verification and look at editorial policies as they affect stories.
Fantastic. We shall be discussing or drilling deeper on this on the other side of the break. We want to take a short break right now. But of course also, just to lay the groundwork on how we're going to do it on the other side of the break, this is the Leadership Forum, and you can see there is a lectern awaiting for you there. And of course, just alongside Sheila, we have a bell and there is a red card as well, right? So we give you 6 minutes to deliver your speech or your presentation on the lectern there. This will be your camera there, camera 2, right, or camera 3. My colleague is going to advise you on that much later. So I'm going to be lifting that particular red card midway, you know, like 3 minutes to your time. Sheila, just lift the red card. Yes, that's what you will do. Then towards the end, I'm going to dangle that particular bell just to warn you, yes, you're just almost towards the end. Then I'm going to ring it to just tell you, or say, to tell you that, yes, your time is out and you need to walk out from the podium. So on the other side of the break, we'll listen to your prepared presentations. And of course, we're going to hear what also our viewers have to say and engage on the salient points that you will have raised on the other side of the break. So don't go away, much more coming up from the other side of the break. But we ask you this question, do you think Media role models matter, do you think? Media role models matter. Hit us on Twitter. AM Live NTV is a Twitter handle. AM Live NTV is a profile name on Facebook. Don't go away.
Sound check 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 anasema unaiget eh haya
Previously on Leadership Forum.
Finding a true north is really what I would call a Herculean task. But when we mention true north, there's a certain word there that says true. And the opposite of true is false. Therefore, we suppose that if we're seeking true north, it means that there's some false north. And when we say we don't have our true north, it means we are following a false north.
You know, I've defined a lot of yeses in my life, and the yeses now empower me to say no to certain things. And so I don't do things, I just waste my time. I am very conscious of the difference between activity and productivity. I'm very, very conscious of the difference between motion and progress.
Let's look at our country over a 50-year span, over a 100-year span, and ask ourselves, are we moving in the right directions? The answer has to be yes. Those who are parents must understand that just because your son has come home drunk once, you don't kill him. You talk to him.
Development, which has become an industry, has become a conversation. We talk about development projects, development initiatives, development budgets, development, maendeleo. Is like a treadmill that we're on. And if you ask yourself, where is this thing taking us?
Leadership Forum, every Friday on AM Live.
Well, that is what we had last week, of course, discussing leadership and corruption. And today we are going to discuss leadership and mentorship. And of course, as I'd introduced to you earlier, the people that I'm holding court with, they will walk to the podium this morning. And of course, we shall read out also their profiles and what they're doing. Currently, they're media personalities. They've been on the screens before, so they're not any new to you. Right, so you have now the ground rules. Michael will begin with you. Remember, you have your mic on you, so you can just remove your microphone, just place it at the back of your seat. You can walk also to the podium. Like right now? Yes, right. So Michael is the CEO of Michael Oyer and Associates. He's also the executive leadership and communication coach. He's a former news anchor. Also, he's a counseling psychologist, a media practitioner, and also an MC. And he's going to talk to us this morning on the topic of leadership and mentorship. Michael, you have 5 minutes, 6 minutes, I should say, beginning now.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. As I sit and stand and think about leadership in connection with mentorship, I cannot but bring to the fore what I am also involved in, and that is coaching. Leadership, without a doubt, is the ability to influence, to bring people to work with you, to rally behind a cause, and most of the time for a good reason, a good cause. But we have seen leadership, and for that matter, mentorship, for bad reasons also. So that definition of leadership, I believe, would work with regard to being able to influence the young people in this country. But I don't think it only works in that direction. I think, especially based on the discussion we've been having, that leadership can go in the other direction, where young people influence older people, especially when we talk about the digital age. Mentorship is necessary for a leader and in leadership. I believe that every leader has gone through a process of being mentored at one point or the other, and that every leader, or a good leader, is mentoring someone else as they continue in their leadership role. But what is mentorship? I see mentorship as that process where I have walked this path, I've gone through this jungle, and I know this one path which worked for me. There are those places where I failed, and as my mentee, I would then tell you, do not go down that road, because when I went down that road, there was 1, 2, 3, 4 failures. But this is what I did when I succeeded, and therefore, in my mentoring, I would suggest that you do what I did, A, B, C, D, E. Whilst that has its place, especially when one is joining a field, and I remember being mentored myself, joining media, for instance, there are basic rules, there are things that you do and things that you do not do, at least at that time. It is important to follow the advice that's being given by a leader who is mentoring you. And I'm not shy to say, the Jennifer Okungus, the Kathleen Kasavulis, the John Sibi Okumus from a distance, less directly. And I followed that instruction and that advice that this is the way I did it, and I did it the way they told me they did it for their success. But I'd like to bring in the new element, and I say new because it's not part of the leadership and mentorship, and that is coaching. Because I find as a practitioner that in coaching, you not only walk along with this individual and you allow them to chart their course and their path in their future and where they want to go, but you then inspire them by asking them some questions, by provoking some creative and inspiring thought, and then help them maximize their full potential, both personally in life and personally in their profession. Why do I think this is critical to leadership and as a leader? As a leader, you would want to be able to allow your team members or people looking up to you to supersede the level that you achieve. So my greatest joy would be that those who I had the honor and privilege of introducing to media, for instance, have grown and superseded anything that I was able to achieve. That's as a leader who is coaching. For the person who's being coached, it then gives them the freedom and the room to think beyond the boundaries of who they're with. So it is not, Michael did it this way, I can't suggest to him doing it another way. But indeed, that different way is what you would be encouraging and helping them think through it, evaluate it, sounding off things against you as the coach, and then also challenging them. Why do you think you should be going in that direction? And the total sum of it would be that you then have leaders who are informed by their own values, are on their mission, and have their vision, as opposed to, in the case of mentorship, the way I see it, they borrow someone else's vision, someone else's mission, and might take up someone else's values. That may happen in coaching, that you share them, but I sense that in mentorship, it is more one way. I am the authority. I am the one who's gone ahead. I tell you. In coaching, we have a discussion, we walk on a journey, and we see you flourish, and the more you flourish, the better it is for all of us. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Michael. Right, Michael Riviere there. Talking about mentorship, mentorship is necessary for a leader and for leadership. And of course, a raft of other issues and salient points that he's raised that we're going to be discussing also much later in the course of the program. Remember, also you can chime in. Use AM Live NTV as a Twitter handle. AM Live NTV also is our profile name on Facebook. Up next, we have Effie Hunja, and Effie will walk to the podium as well. Remember also to just remove your microphone and put it at the back of your seat and walk to the lectern. Is going to be speaking on also leadership and mentorship, role models, being custodians also of virtues in the society as well. So Effie Hunja will have his profile as well up next. Right, he's a media consultant. Let me just read his profile. It should be up on the screen. He's a corporate communications consultant with bias towards media and strategy. 8 of those years were in mainstream media on the business desk and current affairs desk. Also involved in mentorship of younger people within and without the industry. If you have 6 minutes, beginning now.
Well, Debal, thank you for having me. I want to just briefly talk about media and ask the question, is it a custodian? Are they leaders, if anything? And do they mentor, if anything? You see, media globally is regarded as a credible source of information because it is largely assumed, and safely so, that whatever they're putting out on their screens, on their magazines, and on the different publications, that it is well researched and well vetted. And when pollsters do the polls, especially here in Kenya, asking the question, which is the most credible institution more often than not, the media has, I think, been number one and at the worst, top two. And so people view the media as a safe pair of hands. But when you talk about leadership, the first thing that a leader needs to ask themselves is, are you aware that you're a leader? Because if you don't know that you're a leader, then you will walk to a place recklessly without knowing that there are people following you. So knowing that you're a leader is a deliberate thing that has to be with you as a leader. Now, the whole debate of, are leaders born? Are they made? It's been an ongoing debate for many years, but it is important to note that you are a leader if you are one. If you don't know you're a leader, then the people who are following you are in trouble. The question is that the great dilemma of media? And what is the role of leadership? Number one, I think a leader needs to be a teacher. And in this case, the media. What are we teaching the people who are interacting with us through the screen, especially electronic media? And what are we portraying? There is good and there is bad. You cannot legislate morality. And many times different governments across the world have attempted to legislate morality, but you realize that the thing that governs the way you live your life, you really have to look for your true north, if there is something like that. You look for it and it legislates the way you live your life. And media needs to stand in a position where indeed we cannot legislate the morality, but media needs to give direction and leadership in terms of morality. For example, I hear parents complaining about some of the shows that we air on our free-to-air stations. Between 4 and 6, all the music videos and all the gyrations and everything that goes with that. I think as media we need to come back and ask ourselves, what role are we playing? What are we teaching? What are we teaching generations that are behind us? Because as leaders, we are also mentors in that regard. The second thing I think that media needs to be cognizant of is that they are leaders when it comes to advocacy. They need to advocate for stories that promote humanness, if you will. I started my career in the media right here in this station in my early 20s. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about being a news anchor was when we would highlight stories that would go and change people's lives. The most recent one that comes to mind is the story of Mwende, who was beaten to a pulp by her husband because she could not bear children for him. And she beat him and she maimed him. And media ran with that story to the point that corporates and different individuals came up and got to a place of restoring her dignity once again. So media is an advocate. And when media loses its advocacy status, then we are in trouble. And the reason why we're in trouble if media loses its advocacy status is because media is followed by lots of people who don't go behind the scenes to ask if what they're hearing is actually true. And so the media needs to continue doing the role of advocacy. But when we talk about advocacy, there's the human interest agenda, number one. But number two, media needs to be a leader when it comes to the liberation agenda. Now, in this country, we have seen lots of reporting on corruption, which is a question you began by asking us. Is it that corruption has increased exponentially, or what is going on behind there? But media needs to be cognizant of their liberation agenda, which means they need to be bold about the things that are ailing our society. For example, the greed that continues to ail our country. There's a lot of greed, and greed is what breeds all this corruption and all this, sort of mafia style of gangs running the city and Matatu sector and all this and all this. And greed is a bad thing. It reminds me of of a famous 19th century author called Leo Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy writes in one of his books and asks a question, how much land is enough? And he gives a story, and he says, a man was offered the world, and he was to be at the starting point at 6 a.m., and he was told, you have the whole day, and the breadth that you walk, please make sure you're back here by 6 p.m. And wherever your feet go, that will be your land. And the man walks and walks and walks, and when it gets to 12 noon, he calculates that if it took him 6 hours this way, it will take him 6 hours back. And the minute the man walks 6 hours back and gets to the point where he started, he falls down and dies. And the question was, how much land is enough? And the answer to that, Leo Tolstoy says, just enough to bury a man. 6 feet, 6 by 6 feet, you know, and so greed needs to be talked about in our society. And as I bring this to a close, there's the brave side of advocacy, but you also want to be cowardly. And let me qualify to say that being cowardly means that when information comes to you as media, do you vet it before you run it out? Is it shareholder value? Is it fast off the blocks? You know, who broke this story fast is a common question in the newsrooms and, you know, all over the world. And media needs to be cowardly in that regard about giving out information that is not credible. You know, Chinua Achebe, as I bring this to a close, in Things Fall Apart, says there's a very interesting quote. He says, the poor man stands on the roof of his house, looking down at the ruins of what used to be the house of the brave man. and sometimes cowardice will allow you to see another day. And media needs to lead when it comes to disseminating information that is credible, that is true, that is valuable, at the expense of being called cowards. Thank you. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Effie, there. Of course, he's raised some salient points that we're going to be looking at much later in the course of the program. Are you aware that you are a leader, right? That media should be leaders when it comes to advocacy, also a deliberation over gender as well. Right, we shall move on, and we shall hear also right now from John Sibi Okumu, who is a teacher, he's a mwalimu as he calls himself, of English and French. Also is a presenter. He used to be a presenter to the summit, the Zen Africa Challenge, JSO Earth 7. Also is a stage actor. Lion in Tinga Tells, screen actor, The Constant Gardener, The Fast Grader, Shake Hands with the Devil, playwright, Kagia, role play minister, Karibu. Also is a children's writer, Tomboy, a master of mass management. We've got 6 minutes. 6 minutes starting now.
The value can quite simply just stop me when it's 6 minutes over. I can never stop. So the time factor is not an issue. I'm going to ring the bell. And people call me Mwalimu. I don't call myself. So that was a journalistic qualification. I simply address this notion of what these two words meant to me on a very subjective, on a very personal level. Not with direct impact on the media, but just the whole idea of leadership. So I'll define my terms, I'll tell you what I think, and then I wish to end by reading you a poem that encapsulates what I think, because I like poetry. Brass tacks, what is a leader? If you look it up, a leader might be somebody who shows the way, who's up front and shows the way. And there's a story about the word mentor, and it comes from Greek mythology. If you've read Homer, I think my dear friend Effie was quoting Achebe and Tolstoy and all these. I want to go back to a man called Homer who wrote the Odyssey. And in the Odyssey, there's a fellow called Odysseus who's having all these adventures. He's gone to fight in the Trojan War, and he's gone away for 10 years. And he leaves his palace and his wife, his beautiful wife, Penelope, where he came from. And he assigns his son
Telemachus, this man Mentor, assigns his son, his friend Mentor, to look after his son. And in the story, there's the goddess Athena, who, knowing that this Mentor is the guy who people know and respect, the goddess takes on the form of Athena to go and talk to the young man and try to advise him on going and finding his father, finding out who he is. So this word, if you look at the linguistic, the Mentor, sort of used in 1699 thereabouts in some book, was the person who would give wise counsel to somebody who was raw in the field. So a leader showing us the way, a mentor is an enlightened guide. And I'd like to say that the person to lead and the person to guide, first of all, is yourself as an individual. I think that when we, as Kenyans, think that maybe next year, if Raila Odinga is president, we will be happy because he will be leading us. If Kalonzo Musyoka is president, he will lead us to the promised land. If Musalia Mudavadi, you read the papers. I don't think that we should look to another individual to determine the way in which we ourselves behave. I think we saw a bit of this after the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution, where Kenyans had such an outpouring of zeal for a new dispensation that they were making citizens' arrests, they were queuing up, and there maybe our leaders pointed to an example that we should have followed. Maybe we became cynical. But the first point of contact has to be yourself, I think. I don't think, Michael, that you decide to lie because I told you so. I don't think, Sheila, that you would go and steal something because I told you so. I don't think, Effie, that you would go, unless you're a soldier in our army defending us, I don't think you'd go and kill someone because I told you so. So I'm putting the onus on the individual. We have to lead ourselves guided by a moral compass. I think Barack Obama, this is one of his abiding themes in all his speeches, the personal moral compass, and seeking constantly, because we all make mistakes, for a sense of right or wrong. And as for the mentor, the guide, people come up to me and say, oh, JSO, you know, I want you to mentor me. Again, the mentor is not the teacher for free. The mentor is somebody who has already seen you playing at the top of your game. You can't go to Usain Bolt and say, teach me how to run. You have to practice on a daily basis, get close to being a good runner, and then maybe say, Usain, help me to go along the way. So the person who comes to me for mentorship and wants to write, I want to see the play that they've written. I want to see the article that they've written. I want to see the product which is the result of their best at that particular time. So, in other words, don't blame other people, blame yourself. And I want to end with a poem. It's written by a gentleman called Walter D. Wintle. It's in the English language, and it's in an anthology which I was given quite recently and quite like. It's called Winning Words, Inspiring Poems for Everyday Life. And it's called Thinking. This is my conclusion before you show me a red flag. Thinking by Walter D. Wintle. If you think you are beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you like to win, but think you can't, it's almost a cinch, you won't. If you think you'll lose, you're lost. For out in the world, we find success begins with a fellow's will. It's all in the state of mind. If you think you are outclassed, you are. You've got to think high to rise. You've got to be sure of yourself before you can ever win the prize. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but sooner or later, the man who wins is the man who thinks he can. A bit gender insensitive, but the message comes across. Thank you.
Thank you, John. All right, thank you, John. So a leader shows the way, a mentor is an enlightened guide. And of course, we will be discussing about some of these salient points also John has raised regarding leadership and mentorship. Up next, we have Sheila Munyiga. Sheila is an accomplished media professional with more than 15 years experience in radio, local and international television, print, and is an award-winning performing and recording artist as well. She holds an MA in medical sociology from the University of Nairobi, is a published scholar in the International Journal of Social Sciences, and a highly skilled, driven and proven media communicator. You have 6 minutes, starting now, Sheila Munyiga.
Good morning, gentlemen, again. Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. If you're just waking up, where have you been? But one of the things I love about what I get to do is something that John Sibi Okumu has already talked about, and that is reading. He's got a penchant for reading. I remember interviewing him on this show not too long ago, and it is something that I will always ask anybody and everybody to do. Please don't stop reading. Always keep pursuing. You don't know everything, and some of the things that you think you do know, you really don't. Get ready to unlearn them as well. I am a sociologist at heart, and I begin my presentation, which will be very brief, by taking you back to something that was done in the 60s. Many people will not have read this, but it is a sociologist called Clapper who came up with a theory called selective exposure. And I bring that to the table because I am a media mama, for want of a better word. Growing up, listening to music and wondering when can I sing a song, and then ultimately recording a song, and working for a radio station, and ultimately TV stations and different TV shows. The thing about mass media is this theory that was put forward now by the gentleman I'm telling you about. It's called selective exposure. We've always assumed that we listen to anything and everything that is brought to us. But there's a reason why anything and everything is brought to us. We resonate with anything and everything that is brought to us. We agree with anything and everything that is presented to us. And that is why we continue walking round and round and round the same mountain. How many times have you complained about content on certain radio stations and thinking it is inappropriate for certain times? But what do you still do? You keep tuning in. How do you know what was discussed if you do not know, if you were not tuned in the first place? We take ourselves, we expose ourselves to messages, to words, and to lifestyles that resonate with the people that we truly are. In looking at leadership, I believe everybody is a leader. You're leading something, you're being led somewhere, and somebody is walking behind you. You may not know that you are simply because you don't have a title, but in this day and age that we're living in, who needs a title to be anything? In fact, you don't even need a title to be awesome. You can simply be awesome in what you're doing, or just coast along and be as mediocre as everybody else is. By virtue of being in the media, everybody that you see, anybody who writes an article, anybody that you subscribe to, that you follow online, or you read their articles in the paper and never miss an issue of the paper, is already a leader because they are influencing you. You are allowing yourself to be exposed to the content that they present to you, either on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or a monthly basis. Nobody is forcing you, but you look for these people. They hold positions of influence in your life, some willingly, some quite happily to do so too. And just because you see presenters, does that mean that they should be your role model? Ultimately, that is a personal and private decision. But I've always believed some of the people who you will resonate with, some of the people who you will agree with, some of them are just fabrications. They don't exist in real life. They are these creatures that have been created in offices, in boardrooms, even in studios. They are characters that exist to titillate you and to make you feel or think something. But are they real? That I will leave for you to decide. But I want to look very quickly as I finish at the position of women and the media. John Sibi also referred to the age factor, and so I would like to use both of these together as I wind up the ball. I promise I will be quick. I'm really trying my best.
You've got 2 minutes to go.
Thank you. And now an extra one because you're bantering with me. But the issue of age and gender in the media, and especially when it comes to leadership, growing up in a patriarchal society as a woman, no matter what field you choose to go into, you will have to be swimming up the current. You will have to work harder than some of your male counterparts. And you know it's true. Because ultimately, for women in the media and other positions, you are reduced to your look or your look. But I believe, as a leader, and for everybody in any position who's tuned in and watching now, it's not about how you look. It's the work that you do. It's what you bring to the table. That really should be what we as men and women should be judged on. That I said I would do this and I achieved this. That I have brought to you the most honest and real stories, and you have consumed them because they are real and true, not because they were done by a woman or they were done by a man. And in closing, again, I've said I'm closing twice, I'd like to say to anybody who's thinking of a career in journalism, it's not easy, but you have got to try it. It's one of the most fantastic places to be, but always remember why you're doing what you're doing. You may have to struggle. You will be put up against the problems of finances and telling the truth, but ultimately, can you face yourself in the mirror and live with the stories that you put out? Can you live with the consequences of the stories that you tell? That is the mark of a good leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Can you live with the consequences of a story that you tell? And I can see also a lot of reactions here on Twitter. Remember, we were asking you this morning, do role models really matter in the media? Right? Hit us on Twitter, or AM Live NTV is a Twitter handle, and AM Live NTV is a profile name on Facebook. And I can see a lot of reactions here. We have Christiangs Ayura saying, a leader is anyone who seeks to make the world a better place at all corners of the globe, be it in organization or type of work. Also, we have Power of Sheets, such a beautiful day, turn on my TV, and dang. We have at Miss Mwanyiga, right? They've not seen you for quite a long while. Also, aha, my friend, mentor, and business partner, and legendary John Sibi Okumu on AM Live, right? This is Kinyanjui Kombani saying there. Esipala, right? As an aspirant or aspiring journalist, one needs people to look up to. Mentorship and coaching is very important. Yeah, those are just some of the reactions that we can see here. A lot of them I shall be reading also from my phone as well. And as we engage on this particular discussion, also get to drive a show with us. You can also call in, ask your questions, or you can share your contribution as well, as we endeavor to just take this next few minutes that we have to really talk about what our panelists have really shared with us this morning. Let's begin with you, Michael, because you started first. And right now, because, you know, people always think that your life ends when you're out of the screen. But now you've taken it a notch higher right now, and you're into leadership and coaching. And of course, you're a media consultant and communication consultant as well. Tell us more about this.
So whilst in media, in fact, before I joined media, I heard Sheila say she's a medical sociologist. Mm-hmm. I'm a counseling psychologist, mm-hmm. and I finished my master's as I was in media.
Yes.
So I've been practicing as a counseling psychologist, and that's why I also call myself a media practitioner. I'm very careful not to call myself a journalist because of very many debates in that area. I've accepted I'm a practitioner. Coaching is what I recently got into certification to now do, because I find that coaching brings together the counseling and mentorship that we're talking about, and it gives me the opportunity to help individuals who want to take that journey, be it in leadership or communication, through that journey as their coach. It's a wonderful space for me. I'm enjoying it very much. I don't know what else you want me to say.
All right, let's hear from Effie. You also, you in media, but now also you a media consultant as well. So is that just a natural way of, or a natural path for you to take after you have been on the screen, or also working as a journalist?
Well, I think the answer is no. Unless you came into the media as a choice career. For me, I stumbled into it. And like I say, all things art, you can learn art at whatever age. Science, you need to grasp some theories. You know, you don't just go and fly a plane if you don't understand trajectory and winds and all those things. But you can ride a bicycle. You can be taught how to ride a bike at whatever age. It's an art. And I stumbled onto this art and somehow settled into it. And the more I did it, the more I grew to love it. And it brought out things about me that I didn't know were there, because I came in pretty early into the game. Okay. So it's not a natural progression that after you come from the screens that you will continue in it. But I guess and the value of mentorship is that there's people who see in you what you don't see in yourself. There's people who say, hey, you know, I like the way you dribble the ball. I like the way you sing. You know, you want to give it a try. And so for me, there was value in having mentors, people who told me, I think you're good at this. You know, you try this. You're doing this naturally. And so once I learned it on the game, then I transitioned into it. And it was interesting because even as I was on the screen, there was people who used to ask me to give them advice on the nature of our work. And gave a lot of that advice for broke. And woke up one morning and realized, hey, you know what, there's people who are running full-time shows based on this advice that I'm giving. And so I then, left the screen to transition into that. And I enjoyed doing it. And I think it's important that everybody has somebody who believes in them. But just per adventure, you don't. You can believe in yourself. You can have a deep look inside and say, you know what, I'm worth something and I can do something. Yeah. You
talk about looking at your true north, and in fact, last Friday we were talking about finding your true north. And within the media space right now, do you think that the needle is moving away from the true north, or are we spot on the true north? Have we lost our way? What is your own estimation?
It depends on what the true north is. Is it subjective? Is it objective? You could argue from different sides of the coin. But, like you said, if the media is not teaching something positive, then it is going away from its true north. If the media is not reporting factual happenings, then it is going away from its true north. If the media is hell-bent on ratings, if the media is hell-bent on bottom line performance commercially, then it is losing its true north. And this is what I said, that the tragedy of leadership really is if or when you are a leader and you don't know you're a leader. Because by virtue of being called a leader, it means there's some people who are following you. Just by virtue of being called a leader, there are people who are following you. So the tragedy is if there's people following you and you don't know they're following you. And so I think media needs to be very aware that they're leaders on very many fronts. And it would be tragic when individual media houses sit down to do their strategic planning for the future without a bias towards leadership, that it would be tragic for us.
Right, John, you've been also internationally, you've worked with international media outlets as well. When it comes to comparison, international practice and what we do here in the country and the international standards, where can you put Kenya at right now? Just truly on that particular true north. Where is your true north as a media, as a media career?
I think the bar I sort of said this. First of all, the thing that I've realized about my colleagues, which they didn't know about themselves, is that they've all got lovely voices. I just love I love hearing these guys talk, that lovely lower register. I have to go and
but it's already
I can't hear myself speak. It's a recurring theme. I think we're doing well. I think it's very easy to sort of self-flagellate and sort of true norths and everything else. Everything is a progression. I think perhaps now that our media is going through the era, there's the Ice Age, we're going through the era of bling. And the era of bling, as an era, people will recognize its shortcomings and rectify it. But it's a necessary progression. I don't think that if you come back in 10, 15 years' time, our media is going to be what we are. And we forget, as Kenyans, I'm not being terribly sort of nationalistic, and I would like to think myself an internationalist, a universalist. But within that universe, I think we set pretty high standards. And I'd like to segue, as they say in the States, and segue to what Sheila was saying earlier on. The business of being in the media has everything to do with one's relationship with words. And when Sheila was saying you have to read, that is the key. A reader is indeed a leader in the media space. You have to read. You have to have a facility with words. If you hear that, you know, Michael Oyere's has got the gift of the gab, Sheila Mwanyiga's got the gift of the gab. It's not a gift that sort of lands, you know, on a dream. It comes with having a daily relationship with words. So that now I have segued from being on people's screens to being living more or less in semi-retirement as a conference moderator. And it means that I don't necessarily know about the topics that are being addressed at these conferences. I don't know anything about air cargo, but I've dealt with it. I've been to a banking conference. I think as early as yesterday, I don't know what we're launching. We're launching something, banking. And you read up on it, and your pillar, your savior, is your facility to communicate. So I cannot, especially if they're young people watching, I cannot, being a teacher myself, if you're going to go that way, if you're going to be a pilot and do a true north and navigational winds, you know, I flunked all that stuff. And there's no way I'm going to fly you from here to Beijing. But if you start saying, bring out a word or two, then I'm for you. So I think you have to be prepared. And the preparation for what we do is basically read, if you're young, read 3 novels a week. If you're over 80 like myself, make it 1.
All right, so you talk of you know, the bling generation, and this is also where the media space is coming to right now. And there is content, that editorial policy, Sheila, you're talking about, and the personality, the bling personality that also are being ushered into the media in this time and age. So in this epoch of time, are we really losing on the content beat of it? Is the content also being driven by personality? All the content can just carry the day without any personality, Sheila? Okay.
I hear many questions all tagged into one question.
Yeah, and each of you can pick any of them.
And that is good. Yeah. But I would just like to start answering that question by saying it's great to see good-looking people on the television, in the newspapers, on the billboards, or wherever it is that you see the great-looking people. But do not attach your life on this person that you see. Do not attach certain things to this image that you have seen, because you said it, it's the bling generation. And I'm going to say this without saying it, but if I do say it, you will all forgive me. Once upon a time, somebody asked me to host a show, and they got back to me and said, well, we're not going to go with you. We're going to go with somebody else. And what was whispered in my ear was, you know, she's a little bit younger, she's a little bit smaller than you, so sorry, we're not going to go with you. And later on, it was not the best of shows. And they came back to me and said, So maybe we made a mistake in this particular instance. If we were ever to do this again, would you reconsider? And at that point, you realize you've outgrown that particular show as well. So even if you call, you understand that as a human being, you've already evolved and done what you need to do where you were. And so this takes me back to, if you're watching this and thinking all it takes for me to be able to become a TV presenter or a singer is just how I look and how I will be packaged, you are not going to go very far. It is the strength of your character, the integrity, the hard work, the passion that you bring to that particular position, regardless of what it is. It's heart ultimately that separates the best. You can tell that there's something about the best, and it's not about how they look. And we will go back to Wolf Blitzer.
Right.
It's not a very, doesn't make my heart, you know, beat faster when I look at him, but it's the strength, it's your being that is felt in the work that you do.
Okay.
That takes you away from bling and gives you a place.
Right, thank you. Effie,
I want to agree with Sheila. You know, when I think about myself coming in to read the news here, I never forget one day taking public transport on my first 2 months on the news, and some guy finds me at the bus stop, and it's like, what a shame. And why would you be entering a matatu? And it had never bothered me until that day. That, you know, well, I would just time myself and I would drop off wherever I would drop off and walk to the Nation Center gingerly and very happy. And here I was. And I found that there was a facility for me to get a loan and purchase a car. That wasn't me. So I saved up a little money and bought a little Nissan Sunny. And one day, because there's a mosque down here, Jamia Mosque.
Yes.
And on a Friday, as I was leaving the office at about 2 o'clock, the session, the services at the mosque had just come to an end. And some guy flagged me down and told me, Naenda Nairobi West, you know. And he thought my car was a taxi. And I laughed at myself, but it bothered me. You know, why am I driving this? Why am I being stopped, flagged down by people thinking I'm driving a cab? You know, and it's to say that there are external factors that come to you when you're in this space, but you really have to choose how to respond to them internally. Your life is your life. When you live this place, nobody cares about, you know, the way you're dressed and all, and it would be a great injustice to yourself if you went into debt so that you can look that smart. Because what you're saying is that you don't believe in the content of what you're delivering to us Kenyans. And I think, and you see, that goes back to the mentorship. To say, Dibal, well, they call you a celebrity here in Nairobi, and I know you don't have a big bank account, but the reason why people look up to you is because you do a great job. So keep at it, and don't let it sway your value system and what it is you stand for. And that mentorship is very important. So when we talk about that bling generation, it's because there's nobody, you know, telling the younger guys, hey, easy does it. You know, they'll talk for 5 minutes and then they'll move on. But you'll be left for 24 hours ruminating on what they have said and making a mess out of your life. And not just media, but I think in all things. So there's a fake celebrity status, if you will.
All right.
Yeah.
Can we go to Michael, then we come to John?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. There's several things I'd like to respond to, so or add my thoughts to. One, and diverging a little bit, the full gamut of competence in media includes, you know, Dibal's sharp suit, looking a certain way and being able to execute. But I'd like to also add that when I watch television, and I'll talk about television in particular, there's a sense in which I develop a relationship with the on-air personality for whichever show. to an extent where, and I think you've experienced this, and sometimes I like putting myself in the place of the viewer. If I meet Tumi Mahabo, do you know her? That's a generational question. I would respond a certain way, because every single morning as I was at Capital FM, I'd walk in at 4 a.m. The first thing I do is switch on that screen, and I know, good morning to me. And I start working. So if she walks in, I know, but I know to me. There's a relationship we've built. As media practitioners, I think that needs to be respected in the way we respond and relate with those who consume that which we do in whichever sphere that's public. But I also believe that there is room and space for us to be authentic, to have integrity in that which we do. So, yes, there are some consequences, as we were discussing earlier. This is what is required of you. You're going to do it this way. But if it doesn't resonate with you within, then there is room and space with the consequences to say, I can't do it as you want in point C and Z and X, but the rest I can do. And then if they agree, great, go ahead and proceed and do it. But if they don't, then, you know, I think you're better off living whole without that role than getting into many of the troubles that some of us have gotten into, where you live this facade and you end up believing the facade more than everyone else. And when you wake up, you're the only person there still thinking about that facade. So I'd say there's a place for our authenticity, our integrity. There's a place to respect the audience and what happens as we're in this sphere. We do affect people. It does become personal. People walk up to you and we've met somewhere. Were we in high school? Was it primary school? Do you come to my church? Do you know, they go through the list. Truth is, they just spent time with you on air, consistently.
John.
Gosh, lots has been said. There's much to be done. I think one of the things I'd like to comment upon is to go back to the studio executives and their responsibility. In Sheila's story, she's saying she went for a job and somebody didn't give her the job because of the way she looked. Now, if you look at, we're looking at the West, and because I'm of a bracket that can afford to, I've got whatever choice of channels, and I watch, say, Fox News. And you see a program there which is hosted by 3 ladies. And the first thing that you see about them is they've all got this sort of uniform. They're color-coded, turquoise, red, yellow, long legs, and a sort of man in the middle who's sort of whatever. And all these women are maybe by definition sort of contenders to be beauty queens. Now somebody gave them that job. If we want to go that way, it's a way to go. I don't think it's a decision made by people who might give you the sack if you don't wear the kind of tie you're wearing. So that's one thing to say. The responsibility is for the look of a journalistic trend falls with the bosses, viewers, ratings. Where AM Live, Citizen is doing the same, KTN is doing the same, people watching Dabao. Yes. Of course, everybody's watching Dabao and watching us. But the other thing that has disappeared, has gone out through the window. I started my broadcasting career historically at about the age of about 10 or 11. And it's because I was discovered by what was then called Schools Broadcasting. And talent scouts from Schools Broadcasting came to my primary school, Robert Beaumont, Roma Barraclough, Peter King, you know, Wazungu's seconded by the BBC. But the one thing that they did, and which was a function of my career, was that they taught us how to do what we do. We had elocution lessons. We had breathing techniques. So these are skills. of which you're aware in the same way that a tennis player, you know, Djokovic, he's aware that with this shot I'm going to play a backhand. And I think that the training facility, the point of entry, is to interview somebody and say, she looks good, she could be on the 9 o'clock news, not she has been trained to. The crucial on the floor, going through, because I can go back to the mid-60s, 70s, I can do that whole progression. We had producers, and your producer, when you came off the set, is the one who told you, whether you're in an advertising agency, you didn't just go there and read the commercial with a deep voice. You went there and you were told to put the emphasis there. That person has disappeared. When we hear talking about the True North, when we hear our journalists just sort of phonetically pronouncing English words, they would never have survived that process if there was a producer who told them. In my days with the BBC, there was actually a department where you could go to, a separate department, to find out how certain words were pronounced. So if the Israeli Prime Minister was wherever he was, you'd ring up whatever big department and they'd say Netanyahu. You know what I'm saying? So there's none of this excuse. We have no teachers on the floor. I'm sure all these young people, having graduated, who are operating these cameras, are just winging it. But there has to be a boss at the top.
Yes. Just summarize your point.
Executives have to take the responsibility for whom they employ, and within stations there has to be somebody who knows more than the presenter.
Thank you. All right, we really stopped for time. I think we had more time to really delve deeper into this.
But I want to say something, Debo.
They're actually chasing me out of the studio.
Why would you chase us out and I haven't said goodbye yet?
Because we actually stopped for time. But Sheila, I want to thank you so much. John Sibi Okumu, thank you very much also. Effie, it's good to see you after a long while. Marco, of course, this is a discussion we shall sustain. Knowing where we are headed, also we talk about the digital disruption as well, and what is the way forward also for the media industry. Thank you very much.